Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. The crisp Arctic air nipped at Dr. Astrid Larsen's cheeks as she stepped out of her small apartment in Tromsø, Norway. The sky was a canvas of soft pinks and purples, heralding the arrival of the midnight sun. Astrid took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the salty sea breeze. Today was the day she had been preparing for over the past year, the start of her groundbreaking research expedition on Orca communication. As she made her way to the harbor, her mind raced with excitement and a tinge of nervousness. The weight of her backpack, filled with notebooks, spare clothes, and various electronic gadgets, reminded her of the magnitude of her undertaking. She was about to spend the next month alone in the fjords, studying the complex vocalizations of one of the ocean's most intelligent predators. The harbor came into view, boats of various sizes bobbing gently in the calm waters. Astrid's eyes immediately found her vessel, the Havforskeren, a modest 30-foot research boat that would be her home for the coming weeks. Its white hull gleamed in the early morning light, the name proudly displayed in bold blue letters. As she approached, she saw a familiar figure standing on the dock. "God morgen, Astrid," called out Eric, the harbor master. His weathered face broke into a warm smile as she drew near. "God morgen, Eric," Astrid replied, returning the smile. "Beautiful day for setting sail, isn't it?" Eric nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Aye, that it is, but don't let it fool you. The weather can turn quick out there in the fjords. You be careful, you hear." Astrid appreciated Eric's concern. Despite her years of experience, she knew the waters could be treacherous. "I will, Eric. I've got all the latest weather tracking equipment on board. I'll keep a close eye on it." Eric helped her load the last of her supplies onto the Havforskeren. As Astrid did a final check of her equipment, Eric's voice took on a more serious tone. "Astrid, there's something else you should know. There have been reports of unusual orca behavior lately." Astrid paused, her interest piqued. "Unusual how?" Eric shrugged, a hint of unease in his eyes. "Just aggressive? A few fishing boats have reported close encounters. Nothing serious, mind you, but, well, just keep your wits about you out there." Astrid nodded, filing away this information. It could be valuable for her research. "Thanks for the heads up, Eric. I'll be extra cautious." With final checks complete, Astrid started the boat's engine. The low rumble filled the air, mixing with the cries of seagulls overhead. Eric untied the mooring lines, and with a final wave, Astrid guided the Havforskeren out of the harbor and into the open waters of the fjord. As the shoreline receded behind her, Astrid felt a surge of exhilaration. The vast expanse of water before her held so many secrets, and she was determined to uncover them. She set a course for Kvaløya, an island known for its orca populations, especially during the herring seasons. Hours passed as Astrid sailed deeper into the fjord system. The scenery was breathtaking. Towering cliffs rose on either side, their faces etched with centuries of weathering. Waterfalls cascaded down in silver ribbons, feeding the fjord below. Astrid allowed herself a moment to marvel at the raw beauty of her surroundings before returning her focus to the task at hand. She began setting up her hydrophones. Sensitive, underwater microphones designed to capture the complex vocalizations of marine life. As she worked, her mind wandered to the years of study that had led her to this moment. Orcas had fascinated her since childhood, their intelligence and complex social structures setting them apart from other marine mammals. But it was their language that truly captivated her. The clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls they used to communicate were like nothing else in the animal kingdom. With the hydrophones deployed, Astrid settled into the small cabin to monitor the incoming data. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the soft hum of equipment created a soothing ambiance. Hours ticked by with no sign of orcas, but Astrid remained patient. Fieldwork often required long periods of waiting. As the day wore on, Astrid's persistence was rewarded. A series of distinct clicks came through her headphones, causing her heart to race. She rushed to the deck, binoculars in hand, scanning the water's surface. There, about half a mile off the port side, she saw them, the distinctive black and white shapes of orcas breaking the surface. "Yes," she exclaimed. unable to contain her excitement. She counted at least 6 individuals, possibly more beneath the surface. Quickly, she jotted down notes about their behavior and direction of travel. Astrid maneuvered the Hafoskeran closer, being careful to maintain a respectful distance. Through her binoculars, she observed the pod's behavior. They seemed to be in a social mood, with lots of surface activity, spy hopping, tail slapping, and even a few breaches. As she watched, Astrid noticed something odd. The Orca's vocalizations, coming through clearly on her hydrophones, seemed different from what she had heard in previous encounters. There was an urgency to their calls, a complexity that she hadn't observed before. She made a note to analyze the recordings in detail later. So engrossed was she in her observations that Astrid failed to notice the changing weather. The clear sky that had accompanied her journey was now giving way to dark, ominous clouds rolling in from the north. The wind began to pick up, causing the Hafoskeran to rock more noticeably. It was only when a loud clap of thunder broke her concentration that Astrid realized the danger she was in. She looked up, alarmed to see how quickly the storm had approached. The once calm fjord was now churning with whitecaps, and rain began to pelt the deck. "Damn it," Astrid muttered, rushing to secure her equipment. She needed to find shelter, and fast. But as she turned to head back to the cabin, a movement in the water caught her eye. The orcas, instead of diving deep to avoid the storm as she would have expected, were drawing closer to her boat. Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. The orca's behavior was unlike anything she had ever witnessed or read about. As the storm raged around her and the pod closed in, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. What if Eric's warning about aggressive behavior was more serious than she had realized? With rain lashing her face and the boat pitching violently beneath her feet, Astrid made a dash for the cabin. She needed to radio for help and find a way out of this increasingly dangerous situation. But as she reached for the cabin, a massive shape breached the water just yards from the Hafoskeran. An adult male orca, its 6-foot dorsal fin slicing through the air, crashed back into the sea, sending a wave over the deck that nearly knocked Astrid off her feet. As she clung to the railing, heart pounding, Astrid realized that her research expedition had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The orcas she had come to study were now studying her, and the tables had turned in the most terrifying way possible. The real test of survival was just beginning, and Astrid found herself trapped between the fury of the storm and the mysterious intentions of one of the ocean's apex predators. The storm hit with a ferocity that caught Astrid off guard. One moment, she was clinging to the railing of the Hafoskeran, watching the orca sink back beneath the churning waves. The next, a wall of water crashed over the deck, drenching her to the bone and nearly sweeping her overboard. "Helvete!" Astrid cursed, spitting out seawater as she scrambled to maintain her footing on the slick deck. The wind howled around her, drowning out even the thunder that rumbled overhead. Rain lashed at her face, stinging her eyes and making it nearly impossible to see. With Herculean effort, Astrid pulled herself along the railing towards the cabin door. She had to get inside, had to reach the radio. As another wave crashed over the boat, she caught a glimpse of a sleek black dorsal fin cutting through the water nearby. The orcas were still there, circling ever closer despite the raging storm. Finally, reaching the cabin, Astrid wrenched the door open and all but fell inside. She slammed it shut behind her, leaning against it as she caught her breath. The relative quiet inside was almost shocking after the cacophony outside, broken only by the creaking of the boat as it was tossed by the waves. "Okay, Astrid, think," she muttered to herself, pushing wet strands of hair out of her face. "Radio first, then secure the equipment." She lurched across the small cabin to the communication station, grabbing the radio handset. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!" she called. Out, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is the research vessel Hafoskeran, approximately 20 nautical miles northeast of Tromsø. I am caught in a severe storm and require immediate assistance." Astrid waited, desperately hoping for a response. All she heard was static. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she repeated, more urgently this time. "Can anyone hear me? This is Dr. Astrid Larsen on the Hafoskeran. I am in distress and need immediate assistance." Still nothing. Astrid's heart sank as she realized the storm must be interfering with the signal. She was on her own. A violent lurch of the boat sent Astrid stumbling. She heard a crash as some of her equipment toppled to the floor. Gritting her teeth, she began moving around the cabin, securing loose items as best she could. Her precious hydrophones and recording equipment. She couldn't bear to think of the damage being done to them. As she worked, Astrid's mind raced. The storm had come out of nowhere, defying all the weather reports she had checked before setting out. And the orcas, their behavior was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her years of research. The way they had approached the boat, seemingly unafraid of the storm. It was as if they were hunting, but that was impossible, wasn't it? Orcas were indeed apex predators, but attacks on boats were extremely rare, and there had never been a confirmed fatal attack on a human in the wild. Yet Eric's warning echoed in her mind. There have been reports of unusual orca behavior lately. A particularly violent wave struck the boat, and Astrid heard an ominous crack. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then went silent. No, 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 Astrid muttered, rushing to the controls. She tried to restart the engine, but it was dead. The Hafoskeran was now completely at the mercy of the storm, and whatever else might be lurking in the waters around her. Astrid felt panic rising in her chest. She forced herself to take deep breaths, trying to stay calm. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze. She needed to approach this situation logically if she was going to survive. First things first, she needed to assess the damage. Grabbing a waterproof flashlight, Astrid steeled herself to venture back out onto the deck. As she opened the cabin door, the full force of the storm hit her again. The wind nearly ripped the door from her grasp as she stepped out. Immediately, soaked by the driving rain, Astrid played the beam of her flashlight over the deck, looking for signs of damage. What she saw made her blood run cold. There on the port side was a large dent in the hull, as if something massive had rammed into it. "That's not possible," Astrid whispered, her words torn away by the wind. But the evidence was right in front of her. This wasn't storm damage. This was deliberate. A sound cut through the howling wind. A high-pitched whistle followed by a series of clicks. Astrid's head snapped up, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, not 10 meters from the boat, was an orca. Its massive body breached the surface, its eye fixed directly on her. Astrid stood frozen, equal parts terrified and fascinated. In all her years of studying these creatures, she had never been this close to one in the wild. Despite the danger, the scientist in her couldn't help but observe. The orca's eye was incredibly intelligent, seeming to study her as intently as she was studying it. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a flick of its powerful tail, the orca disappeared beneath the waves. The spell broken, Astrid suddenly became aware of movement all around the boat. Dorsal fins broke the surface, circling closer. She counted 1, 2, 3, at least 6 orcas working in perfect coordination. A bump against the hull sent Astrid stumbling. She grabbed the railing to steady herself, her knuckles white with the effort. Another bump, stronger this time from the other side of the boat. The orcas were testing the Hafoskeran's defenses, looking for weaknesses. "This isn't happening," Astrid muttered, her mind reeling. Everything she knew about orca behavior was being challenged. These weren't curious animals investigating an unfamiliar object in their territory. This was a coordinated assault. A particularly large wave crashed over the deck, nearly sweeping Astrid off her feet. As she clung to the railing, she saw a massive shape leap out of the water. Time seemed to slow as she watched the orca's body arch through the air, its white belly gleaming in the dim light. It crashed back into the sea, mere meters from where she stood, sending up a spray of water that drenched her anew. The impact rocked the Hafoskeran violently. Astrid heard the creak and groan of stressed metal, felt the deck shift unnaturally beneath her feet. Water began to seep in through the new cracks in the hull. Reality hit Astrid like a physical blow. The boat was taking on water. If she didn't do something quickly, she would sink, right into the midst of a pod of unnaturally aggressive orcas. Adrenaline surging through her veins, Astrid made a desperate dash back to the cabin. She had to try the radio again, had to find some way to call for help. As she reached for the door handle, a massive black and white form shot out of the water directly in front of her. Astrid stumbled backward, a scream torn from her throat as she came face to face with the gaping jaws of an orca. The massive creature hung there for a moment, suspended between sea and sky, its eye locked on Astrid's. Then gravity took hold, and it fell back into the churning waters, narrowly missing the boat. Astrid scrambled into the cabin, slamming the door behind her. Her hands shook as she grabbed the radio again. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" she shouted into the handset. Desperation clear in her voice. "This is Dr. Astrid Larsen on the research vessel Havforskeren. I am under attack by a pod of orcas. My boat is taking on water. Please, if anyone can hear me, I need immediate assistance." Only static answered her plea. Astrid slumped against the control panel, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She was alone in a sinking boat, in the middle of a raging storm, surrounded by a pod of orcas behaving in ways she had never seen before. As the Havforskeren listed dangerously to one side, water beginning to seep in under the cabin door, Astrid realized with terrifying clarity that her research expedition had become a fight for survival. And as another bone-jarring impact shook the boat, she wondered if this might be a fight she was destined to lose. The Havforskeren groaned under the relentless assault of waves and orcas. Astrid clung to the control panel, her knuckles white, as she frantically tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. The cabin was tilting at an alarming angle, and water sloshed around her ankles. The radio crackled with static, a cruel reminder of her isolation. Another violent impact rocked the boat. Astrid lost her footing and crashed into the opposite wall, pain shooting through her shoulder. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze. If she was going to survive this, she needed to understand what was happening. Grabbing her waterproof tablet, Astrid pulled up her research notes with trembling fingers. Her eyes darted across the screen, searching for anything that might explain the orca's behavior. Transient orcas were known to hunt marine mammals, but attacks on boats were virtually unheard of. What had changed? A particularly loud crack echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of rushing water. Astrid's eyes widened in horror as she saw a fissure spreading across the cabin floor. The hull was breaching. "Think, Astrid, think," she muttered to herself, her mind racing. She needed to buy herself some time. Her gaze fell on the emergency repair kit stowed under the navigation console. It wasn't much, but it might slow the water intake. Wading through the rising water, Astrid retrieved the kit and set to work, her hands shaking as she applied epoxy to the cracks. It was a temporary fix at best, but it was all she had. As she worked, a haunting series of clicks and whistles penetrated the cabin walls. The orcas were communicating, their vocalizations unlike anything Astrid had ever recorded. There was an urgency to their calls, a complexity that sent chills down her spine. Curiosity warred with fear, as Astrid found herself drawn to the sounds. Despite the danger, the scientist in her couldn't resist the opportunity to study this unprecedented behavior. She activated her backup hydrophone, still miraculously functional, and began recording. The vocalizations grew louder, more insistent. Astrid's brow furrowed as she listened intently. There was a pattern to the sounds, a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. It was as if the orcas were coordinating their attacks. "Impossible," Astrid whispered, but even as the word left her lips, she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. These orcas weren't just acting on instinct, they were strategizing. A particularly loud whistle cut through the air, followed by an impact that sent Astrid sprawling. Water gushed in through new cracks, rendering her temporary repairs useless. The Havforskeren was sinking, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Astrid forced it down. She needed to think clearly. Her eyes darted around the cabin, landing on her dry suit hanging by the door. It was her only chance. With the water now up to her waist, Astrid struggled to don the dry suit. Her hands fumbled with the zippers and seals, fear making her clumsy. Another impact rocked the boat, and she lost her balance, plunging fully into the frigid water. Gasping, Astrid fought her way back to the surface. The dry suit had only been partially sealed, and icy water seeped in, stealing her breath. But it was better than nothing. It might just keep her alive long enough to what? She was miles from shore in a stormy sea, surrounded by aggressive orcas. The hopelessness of her situation threatened to crush her, but as the water rose to her, chest survival instinct kicked in. She had to try. Astrid took a deep breath and dove under the water, swimming towards the cabin door. The pressure difference made it difficult to open, but with a surge of desperate strength she managed to wrench it free. She burst to the surface, gulping in air as she clung to the side of the rapidly sinking Havforskeren. The storm still raged. Around her, waves threatening to tear her from her precarious hold. But it was the sleek shapes moving through the water that truly terrified her. The orcas circled closer, their dorsal fins cutting through the turbulent sea with eerie grace. Astrid's scientific mind couldn't help but count and categorize: 2 adult males with towering dorsal fins, 3 females, and, was that a calf, the fee? Presence of a young orca added another layer of complexity to the situation. Orcas were known to be fiercely protective of their young. Had Astrid unknowingly threatened the calf, provoking this attack? As if in response to her thoughts, the largest male breached just meters away. Astrid found herself staring directly into its eye as it hung suspended in the air for a heart-stopping moment. The intelligence she saw there was undeniable and utterly terrifying. The orca crashed back into the sea, sending a wave that nearly tore Astrid from the boat. She clung on desperately, her arms aching with the effort. The Havforskeren was almost fully submerged now, offering little protection. Astrid knew she had to make a decision: stay with the sinking boat and risk being dragged down with it, or strike out for the distant shore and face the orcas in open water. Neither option seemed particularly promising. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Through the driving rain, Astrid spotted a small, rocky island, perhaps half a mile away. It wasn't much, but it was her only hope. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Astrid pushed off from the Havforskeren. The moment she left the relative safety of the boat, she felt horribly exposed. The waves tossed her about like a rag doll, and every shadow in the water made her heart race. Astrid forced herself to focus on her strokes, fighting against the current with every ounce of her strength. Her muscles screamed in protest, the cold seeping into her bones despite the dry suit. But she pushed on, the rocky island her only goal. A high-pitched whistle cut through the air, followed by a series of rapid clicks. Astrid's blood ran cold. The orcas were on the move. She risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. A massive dorsal fin was cutting through the water directly towards her, moving with purposeful speed. Terror gave Astrid a burst of adrenaline. She swam harder, her arms windmilling frantically, but she knew she was no match for an orca's speed. The island still seemed impossibly far away. The water around her churned as the orca drew closer. Astrid could feel the displacement of water from its massive body. Any second now she expected to feel the grip of powerful jaws, but the attack she anticipated never came. Instead, she felt something brush against her leg. Not the rough skin of an orca, but something smooth and artificial. Confusion warred with fear as Astrid treaded water, trying to understand what was happening. That's when she saw it, a piece of debris from the Havforskeren pushed towards her by the orca's wake. Was it possible? Had the orca deliberately guided the debris to her? Before she could process this, another piece of wreckage bumped against her arm, and another. The orcas were circling her, their movements creating currents that pushed a makeshift raft of debris towards her. Astrid's scientific mind reeled at the implications. This level of problem-solving, of apparent assistance, was unprecedented. But she couldn't afford to question it now. Survival came first. Grabbing onto the largest piece of debris, Astrid pulled herself partially out of the water. It wasn't much, but it gave her a desperately needed respite from swimming. As she clung to her makeshift raft, Astrid found herself surrounded by the pod of orcas. They moved in a tight formation, their bodies creating a barrier between her and the worst of the waves. It was as if they were escorting her. "This isn't possible," Astrid murmured, her voice hoarse from swallowing seawater. Yet she couldn't deny the evidence before her eyes. The orcas, which had seemed so menacing before, now appeared to be protecting her. The trip to the island was a blur of exhaustion and disbelief. By the time the rocky shore came into view, Astrid was barely conscious, her body pushed to its absolute limits. With one final surge of effort, she dragged herself onto the rocky beach, collapsing onto the wet stones. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Astrid turned her head towards the water. The orcas were there, their dorsal fins lined up like sentinels against the stormy sky. The largest male rose up, its eye meeting Astrid's one last time. In that moment, despite her exhaustion and fear, Astrid felt a profound sense of connection. Then the darkness took her, and she knew no more. The last thing she heard was the haunting call of the orcas, a sound that would stay with her long after this night was over. As Astrid lay unconscious on the rocky shore, the storm began to subside. The orcas remained for a time, their powerful bodies cutting through the calming waves. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they slipped beneath the surface and vanished into the depths, leaving behind a mystery that would challenge everything Astrid thought she knew about these magnificent creatures. Consciousness returned to Astrid slowly, like the gradual lifting of a heavy fog. The first sensation she became aware of was the cold, a bone-deep chill that seemed to have seeped into every fiber of her being. Then came the pain, a dull ache that pulsed through her entire body with each heartbeat. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim light of dawn. For a moment, disorientation reigned as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Rough stone pressed against her cheek, and the rhythmic sound of waves lapping at the shore filled her ears. Memory came crashing back with the force of a tidal wave. The storm, the sinking boat, the orcas. Astrid bolted upright, instantly regretting the sudden movement as her head spun and her stomach lurched. She dry heaved, her body attempting to expel water that was no longer there. "Easy now," she muttered to herself, taking slow, deliberate breaths. "You're alive. That's what matters." As her vision cleared, Astrid took stock of her situation. She was on a small rocky island, little more than a barren outcropping of stone jutting out of the sea. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of muted greys and silvers. The air was crisp and salty, carrying the distinct scent of the north. Atlantic Astrid looked down at herself, surprised to find she was still wearing her partially sealed dry suit. It had undoubtedly saved her life, protecting her from the worst of the hypothermia that should have claimed her in these frigid waters. Her scientific mind, ever analytical even in the face of personal peril, began to assess her circumstances. She was alive, which was more than she had dared hope for during the height of the storm, but she was also stranded on an uninhabited island with no food, no fresh water, and no means of communication. And then there were the orcas. Astrid's gaze was drawn to the water surrounding her small refuge. The sea was calm now, belying the violence of the previous night. There was no sign of the pod that had, attacked her? Saved her? The events of the night seemed almost dreamlike in the cold light of dawn. Shakily, Astrid got to her feet, wincing at the protests of her battered body. She needed to explore the island, to see if there was anything she could use to improve her situation. But first, she needed to get out of the wet, dry suit. As she struggled with the zipper, a glint of something metallic caught her eye. There, wedged between two rocks near the water's edge, was a piece of debris from the Havforskeren. Her heart leaped at the sight. If some of her equipment had washed up on shore, perhaps her emergency beacon had as well. Astrid made her way carefully across the slippery rocks, her legs trembling with exhaustion and cold. As she drew closer to the debris, she realized it was the remains of one of her equipment cases. Hope surged through her as she pried it open. The contents were a sodden mess, most of the delicate electronics destroyed by the salt water. But there, nestled in a waterproof compartment, was her satellite phone. Astrid's hands shook as she pulled it out, hardly daring to believe her luck. "Please work," she whispered, pressing the power button. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered to life, displaying a weak but present signal. Astrid let out a laugh that was half sob, relief washing over her in waves. She quickly dialed the emergency services number, praying the battery would hold out long enough to complete the call. "Norwegian Joint Rescue Coordination Center. What is your emergency?" A calm voice answered after 2 rings. "This is Dr. Astrid." "Larson," she said. her voice cracking with emotion and disuse. "I'm stranded on an island approximately 20 nautical miles northeast of Tromsø. My research vessel, the Havforskeren, sank in last night's storm. I need immediate assistance." "Dr. Larsen, we've been searching for you since your Mayday call last night," the operator replied, his tone shifting from professional to relieved. "Can you describe your location in more detail?" As Astrid relayed what little she knew about her position, she heard the operator coordinating with rescue teams in the background. Help was coming. She was going to survive this ordeal. But even as relief flooded through her, Astrid couldn't shake the memory of those intelligent eyes staring at her from the stormy sea. The orca's behavior defied everything she thought she knew about these animals. She needed to understand what had happened. "There's something else," Astrid said, interrupting the operator's instructions. "The orcas, they were behaving strangely, aggressively at first, but then I think they might have helped me reach this island." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When the operator spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Dr. Larsen, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's possible that—" "I know how it sounds," Astrid cut him off, frustration creeping into her voice. "But I'm a marine biologist specializing in orca behavior. What I witnessed last night was unprecedented. It needs to be documented, studied." "I understand, Dr. Larsen," the operator said soothingly. "For now, let's focus on getting you to safety. A rescue helicopter is being dispatched to your location. It should arrive within the hour. Please stay where you are and conserve your phone's battery in case we need to contact you again." Astrid agreed, ending the call with mixed emotions. She was grateful for the impending rescue, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of a major scientific discovery. As she waited for the helicopter, Astrid's gaze was drawn back to the sea. The water was calm, almost mirror-like in the early morning light. There was no sign of the orcas, no indication that anything out of the ordinary had occurred here just hours ago. But then, just as she was beginning to doubt her own memories, she saw it. A sleek black dorsal fin broke the surface about 100 meters from shore, then another, and another. Astrid's breath caught in her throat as she realized the entire pod had returned. They moved in a tight formation, their synchronized movements creating barely a ripple in the calm waters. As she watched, transfixed, the largest male, the one she remembered from the night before, separated from the group. It swam closer to the island, its movements slow and deliberate. When it was perhaps 50 meters from shore, it stopped. For a long moment, orca and human regarded each other across the expanse of water. Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. The intelligence in that gaze was unmistakable, challenging everything she thought she knew about these creatures. Then, with a grace that belied its massive size, the orca began to dive. But before it disappeared beneath the waves, it rolled to one side, its eyes still fixed on Astrid. And in that moment, she could have sworn she saw something impossible, a glimmer of recognition, of understanding. The orca's tail flukes broke the surface one last time, sending up a spray of water that glittered in the early morning light. Then it was gone, leaving Astrid with more questions than answers. In the distance, she heard the faint thrum of helicopter blades. Rescue was approaching, bringing with it a return to the world she knew, a world of scientific certainty and peer-reviewed facts. But as Astrid stood on that lonely shore, caught between sea and sky, she knew that her understanding of that world had been irrevocably changed. The orcas had challenged everything she thought she knew about animal intelligence and behavior. Their actions, first aggressive, then seemingly protective, defied easy explanation. It was a mystery that would consume her in the days and weeks to come, driving her to push the boundaries of her field. As the helicopter drew nearer, Astrid made a silent vow. She would return to these waters. She would unravel the mystery of what had happened here. And in doing so, she would bridge the gap between two species, opening up new frontiers of understanding between humans and one of the ocean's most enigmatic predators. The orcas might have disappeared beneath the waves, but Astrid knew this was only the beginning. Her ordeal was over, but her real journey, one of discovery and scientific revolution, was just beginning. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the small hospital room in Tromsø, a stark contrast to the wild sounds of the storm and sea that had surrounded Astrid just hours before. She lay in the bed, her body aching but her mind racing, replaying the events of the past night over and over again. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. "Come in," Astrid called, her voice still hoarse from swallowing seawater. Dr. Elena Nordstrom entered, a kind smile on her face as she approached Astrid's bedside. "How are you feeling, Dr. Larson?" she asked, picking up the chart at the foot of the bed. Astrid managed a weak smile. "Like I've been through a washing machine filled with icebergs," she replied. "But I'm alive, which is more than I expected last night." Dr. Nordstrom nodded sympathetically. "You're very lucky. The hypothermia could have been much worse. We'll keep you under observation for another day or two, but I expect you'll make a full recovery." As the doctor checked her vitals, Astrid couldn't contain herself any longer. "Dr. Nordstrom, have there been any reports about the Orcas? The pod that was in the area last night?" The doctor's hands stilled for a moment, and she gave Astrid a measured look. "I'm afraid I don't have any information about marine life in the area, Dr. Larson. Perhaps once you're feeling better, you can speak with your colleagues at the Research Institute." Astrid felt a flicker of frustration. She knew how it must sound, a scientist claiming to have been both attacked and saved by a pod of orcas. But she knew what she had experienced. "I need to document what happened," Astrid insisted, trying to sit up. "The orca's behavior was unprecedented. It could revolutionize our understanding of cetacean intelligence and social structures." "Doctor," Nordstrom gently but firmly pushed Astrid back against the pillows. "What you need right now is rest, Dr. Larson. Your body has been through a tremendous ordeal. Give yourself time to recover." As if to punctuate the doctor's words, a wave of exhaustion washed over Astrid. She sank back into the bed, her eyelids suddenly heavy. "We've given you a mild sedative to help you sleep," Dr. Nordstrom explained, adjusting the IV drip. "When you wake up, there are some people who'd like to speak with you about your experience." Astrid wanted to protest, to insist that she needed to start her analysis now, but the pull of sleep was too strong. As she drifted off, her last thoughts were of intelligent eyes watching her from storm-tossed waves. Hours later, Astrid awoke to find the hospital room bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't alone. A man in a crisp naval uniform stood by the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the fjord. "Hello?" Astrid said, her voice stronger now. The man turned, revealing a weathered face and keen blue eyes. "Ah, Dr. Larson. Good to see you awake. I'm Captain Erik Johansson, Norwegian Coast Guard." Astrid struggled to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Captain Johansson, I suppose you're here about the Havforskeren." The captain nodded, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Partly, yes. We've located the wreckage, but I'm more interested in hearing your account of what happened out there." Astrid took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. She knew how crucial it was to present her experience accurately, without embellishment or speculation. "It started when the storm hit," she began, recounting the events of that harrowing night. Captain Johansson listened intently, his face impassive, as Astrid described the orca's initial aggression and subsequent seeming change of behavior. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "That's quite a tale, Dr. Larson," he said finally. "In all my years patrolling these waters, I've never heard anything like it." Astrid felt a flicker of hope. "Then you believe me? About the orca's behavior?" The captain's expression was carefully neutral. "I believe that you believe what you're saying, Dr. Larson, but you must understand how it sounds. Orcas attacking a boat, then saving a human. It's unprecedented." "I know how it sounds," Astrid said, frustration creeping into her voice, "but I'm a scientist. I know what I saw. The orca's behavior was complex, coordinated. It challenges everything. We think we know about cetacean intelligence." Captain Johansson held up a hand. "I'm not here to debate marine biology, Dr. Larson. My concern is maritime safety. If there is a pod of aggressive orcas in these waters, we need to know about it." Astrid shook her head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. They weren't just aggressive. Their behavior changed. They saved me. We need to study them, not hunt them or drive them away." The captain's expression softened slightly. "Dr. Larson, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural to try to find meaning in what happened, but we have to deal in facts, not speculation." Before Astrid could argue further, there was another knock at the door. A young woman entered, her eyes widening as she saw Astrid awake. "Astrid, thank God you're all right." The woman rushed to the bedside, carefully embracing Astrid. "Maria," Astrid said, recognizing her research assistant. "What are you doing here?" Maria pulled back, her eyes brimming with tears. "When we lost contact with the Hafeskeren, I feared the worst. The whole institute has been worried sick." Captain Johansson stood, nodding to both women. "I'll leave you two to catch up. Dr. Larson, we'll speak again before you're discharged. Try to rest." As the door closed behind him, Maria turned back to Astrid, her expression a mix of relief and curiosity. "Astrid, what happened out there? The Coast Guard said something about orcas?" Astrid sighed, feeling the weight of her experience pressing down on her. "Maria, I saw something out there. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about orcas." Over the next hour, Astrid recounted her experience to Maria in detail, from the storm's sudden appearance to the orca's inexplicable behavior. Maria listened with rapt attention, her scientific mind clearly grappling with the implications of Astrid's tale. "This is incredible," Maria said when Astrid finished. "If what you're saying is true, it could revolutionize our understanding of cetacean cognition and social behavior." Astrid nodded emphatically. "Exactly. But the Coast Guard, the doctors, they all think I'm suffering from some sort of trauma-induced delusion." Maria's brow furrowed in thought. "Well, your experience does defy conventional understanding. We'll need evidence to support your claims." "The hydrophone," Astrid exclaimed suddenly, sitting up straighter despite the protest from her aching muscles. "I managed to activate my backup hydrophone during the encounter. If it survived, we might have audio recordings of the orca's vocalizations." Excitement blazed in Maria's eyes. "That could be crucial evidence. I'll contact the salvage team, see if they can locate it in the wreckage." As Maria pulled out her phone to make the call, Astrid felt a renewed sense of purpose. She may have lost her boat and her equipment, but she had gained something far more valuable, a glimpse into a level of cetacean intelligence that could change the scientific world forever. "There's something else," Astrid said as Maria finished her call. "The way the orcas moved, the way they communicated, it was like nothing I've ever seen before, I think. I think they might have been using some form of echolocation to coordinate their actions." Maria's eyes widened. "Echolocation as a form of complex communication, that would be groundbreaking." Astrid nodded, her mind racing with the possibilities. "We need to get back out there, Maria. We need to find that pod again." "Astrid," Maria said gently, "you nearly died out there. The Institute, the Coast Guard, they're not going to let you go charging back into dangerous waters, chasing a pod of potentially aggressive orcas." Frustration welled up in Astrid. "Then what? We just ignore what happened? Pretend it never occurred?" Maria placed a comforting hand on Astrid's arm. "No, of course not. We approach this scientifically. We gather evidence, we form hypotheses, we design controlled studies. If what you experienced is real, we'll prove it." Astrid took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. Maria was right, of course. She couldn't let her excitement override her scientific training. "You're right," Astrid conceded. "We do this properly. But Maria, promise me something." "Anything," Maria replied. "Promise me you'll keep an open mind. What I saw out there, it doesn't fit neatly into our current understanding. We can't let preconceived notions blind us to the possibility of something truly revolutionary." Maria squeezed Astrid's hand. "I promise. We're scientists, after all. Our job is to question, to explore the unknown. And Astrid, I believe you. We'll figure this out together." As the late afternoon sun painted the hospital room in warm hues, Astrid felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had survived a harrowing ordeal, but the real challenge lay ahead. Convincing the scientific community of what she had witnessed would be no easy task. But as she looked at Maria's determined face, Astrid knew she wasn't alone in this quest. The mystery of the orca's behavior was just beginning to unfold, and Astrid was determined to see it through, no matter where it led. As she settled back, against her pillows, her mind drifted to the vast dark waters of the fjord, where somewhere a pod of orcas swam, carrying with them secrets that could change our understanding of the natural world forever. The harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room at the Tromsø Marine Research Institute cast an unforgiving glare on the faces of those assembled. Astrid Larsen stood at the head of the table, her hands gripping the edges tightly as she faced her colleagues. 2 weeks had passed since her near-death experience in the fjord, and though her body had mostly healed, the memory of that night remained vivid in her mind. "Thank you all for coming," Astrid began, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "As you know, I've called this meeting to discuss the events that occurred during my recent research expedition." She scanned the faces before her: Maria, her loyal research assistant, Dr. Henrik Nielsen, the Institute's director, and several other senior researchers. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism. Dr. Nielsen leaned forward, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. "Astrid, we're all glad you're safe, but I must admit, we're concerned about the claims you've been making. Orcas attacking and then saving you? It's hard to believe." Astrid took a deep breath. She had anticipated this reaction. "I understand your skepticism, Henrik. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. But I'm not here to speculate. I'm here to present evidence." She nodded to Maria, who dimmed the lights and started a projector. On the screen appeared a spectrogram, a visual representation of sound frequencies over time. "This," Astrid explained, "is a recording from the backup hydrophone that miraculously survived the sinking of the Havforskeren. What you're seeing and about to hear are Orca vocalizations from the night of the incident." She pressed play, and the room filled with a series of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. To the untrained ear, it might have sounded like typical Orca vocalizations, but Astrid saw recognition dawn on the faces of her colleagues. "The complexity of these vocalizations is unprecedented," she continued. "The frequency modulation, the rapid changes in pitch and duration, it suggests a level of communication far beyond what we've previously documented in orcas." Dr. Elena Sokolov, the Institute's leading bioacoustics expert, leaned in, her eyes wide. "This is remarkable, Astrid. The structure of these calls, it's almost like a language." Encouraged, Astrid pressed on. "Exactly, Elena, and there's more." She switched to a new slide, showing a series of still images captured from the Havforskeren's emergency beacon. "These photos, taken just before the boat sank, show the orca's behavior. Look at their positioning, the way they're moving in formation." The images, though grainy, clearly showed the orcas swimming in a tight, organized pattern around a central point, where Astrid had been struggling in the water. Dr. Nielsen stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It does appear coordinated. But Astrid, this is still a far cry from proving that these orcas intentionally saved you." Astrid nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right, Henrik. We can't prove intent, but we can't ignore the evidence either. The orca's behavior that night was unlike anything we've ever documented. It challenges our entire understanding of cetacean cognition and social structures." She paused, looking each of her colleagues in the eye. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking for the chance to investigate further, to mount a proper research expedition and study this pod." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Astrid could almost see the gears turning in her colleagues' minds, weighing the potential scientific breakthrough against the risks and uncertainties. Finally, Dr. Nielsen spoke. "What you're proposing, Astrid, it's not without risk. After what happened to the Havforskeren, the Institute can't justify sending you back out there alone." Astrid felt her heart sink, but before she could protest, Maria stepped forward. "She won't be alone, I'll go with her." "As will I," Elena added, surprising everyone. "If there's even a chance that these orcas are displaying this level of complex behavior, we need to document it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Astrid felt a surge of gratitude for her colleagues' support. Dr. Nielsen held up his hands, calling for quiet. All right. I can see I'm outnumbered here, but we do this by the book. Full safety protocols, constant communication with the Coast Guard, and at the first sign of danger, you abort the mission." "Understood," Astrid nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, Henrik, thank you." As the meeting adjourned and her colleagues filed out, each offering words of support and excitement, Astrid remained rooted to the spot, a mix of emotions washing over her. Relief at being believed, anticipation for the research ahead, and an undercurrent of anxiety about returning to the scene of her near-death experience. Maria approached, placing a hand on Astrid's shoulder. "You did it. We're going back out there." Astrid managed to smile. "We are, but Maria, what if we're wrong? What if what I experienced was just a freak occurrence, or worse, a hallucination brought on by hypothermia and fear?" Maria's grip on her shoulder tightened reassuringly. "Then we'll have gathered valuable data on orca behavior in the fjords. Science isn't about being right all the time, Astrid. It's about asking questions and seeking answers, wherever they may lead us." Astrid nodded, feeling her resolve strengthen. "You're right. Whatever we find out there, it's going to advance our understanding." As they left the conference room, Astrid's mind was already racing with preparations for the expedition. They would need to design new hydrophones capable of capturing the full range of orca vocalizations, develop protocols for safely observing the pod without influencing their behavior, and... Her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a familiar figure striding down the hallway towards them. Captain Erik Johansson of the Coast Guard, his face set in a grim expression. "Dr. Larsen," he called out as he approached. "I heard about your proposed expedition. I'm afraid I can't allow it." Astrid felt as if she'd been doused with icy water. "What? But why?" "The Institute has approved it. We'll be following all safety protocols." Captain Johansson cut her off with a raised hand. "It's not about safety protocols, Doctor. We've received reports from fishing vessels in the area. The orca pod you encountered? They've been spotted again, and their behavior is concerning." "Concerning how?" Maria asked, her voice tense. The captain's face was grave as he replied. "They've been approaching boats, circling them, even nudging them. It's not normal behavior. Until we can assess the situation, I can't in good conscience allow civilian vessels into that area of the fjord." Astrid felt her frustration rising. "But Captain, don't you see? This is exactly why we need to get out there. If the orcas are displaying unusual behavior, we need to study it, understand it. We might be witnessing a significant shift in orca-human interactions." Captain Johansson shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry, Dr. Larsen, but my priority is the safety of everyone in these waters. For now, the area is off-limits to all but Coast Guard and authorized research vessels." As the captain turned to leave, a thought struck Astrid. "Wait, what if we went out on a Coast Guard vessel? With your crew under your supervision?" The captain paused, considering. "That might be a possibility, but it would require approval from my superiors, and I can't promise anything." Astrid felt a glimmer of hope. "Please, Captain, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Try to study something truly unprecedented. We'll abide by any restrictions you set." After a long moment, Captain Johansson nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do. But Dr. Larsen, be prepared for disappointment. And if we do get approval, you follow my orders to the letter out there. Clear?" "Crystal clear, Captain, thank you." As Captain Johansson walked away, Astrid turned to Maria, a mix of excitement and apprehension on her face. "Well, it's not ideal, but it's a chance. We'd better start preparing just in case." Maria nodded, her expression mirroring Astrid's. "I'll start gathering the equipment." "But Astrid, are you sure you're ready for this? To go back out there?" Astrid took a deep breath, memories of that terrifying night flashing through her mind. The howling wind, the icy water, those intelligent eyes watching her from the depths. But along with the fear came a sense of wonder, of being on the brink of a major discovery. "I have to be ready," she said finally. "Whatever's happening out there with those orcas, it could change everything we thought we knew about them. We can't let this opportunity slip away." As they walked back to their lab, Astrid's mind was already racing with possibilities. What would they discover out on the fjord? Would the orcas display the same unusual behavior? And if they did, what did it mean for our understanding of these magnificent creatures? One thing was certain: the mystery of the fjord orcas was far from over, and Astrid was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. The steel-grey waters of the fjord stretched out before them, the jagged coastline a dark silhouette against the overcast sky. Astrid Larsen stood on the deck of the Coast Guard vessel, her eyes scanning the horizon. Despite the thermal suit she wore, she couldn't suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Nervous?" Maria asked, coming to stand beside her. At the railing, Astrid managed a weak smile. "Terrified," she admitted, but excited too. It's strange being back out here. Captain Johansson's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Dr. Larson, we're approaching the coordinates where the Orcas were last sighted. You might want to get your equipment ready. Astrid nodded to Maria, and they moved to the array of scientific equipment they had set up on the deck. State-of-the-art. Hydrophones, cameras with powerful zoom lenses, and a drone for aerial observations. They were prepared for anything. As Maria began lowering the hydrophones into the water, Astrid couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The last time she had done this, she had been blissfully unaware of the danger that lurked beneath the waves. Now, every shadow in the water made her heart race. Hydrophones are live, Maria reported, her voice tense with anticipation. Recording. All frequencies. Astrid nodded, putting on her headphones. For a long moment, all she heard was the ambient noise of the fjord, the lapping of waves against the hull, the distant cry of seabirds. And then, there, Astrid exclaimed, her eyes widening. Do you hear that? Maria quickly donned her own headphones, her expression changing from confusion to amazement. It's them, she whispered. The same vocalizations we heard on the recording. The underwater world came alive with a symphony of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. But there was something different about these vocalizations, something that made the hair on the back of Astrid's neck stand up. They're getting closer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And there's a pattern to it, almost like they're talking to each other, Maria finished, her face pale. Coordinating. Captain Johansson approached, his weathered face creased with concern. Dr. Larson, we're picking up multiple large objects on sonar approaching fast. What are your orcas up to? Before Astrid could respond, the sea around them erupted. Sleek black bodies broke the surface, water cascading off powerful dorsal fins. The orcas had arrived, and they were surrounding the boat. My God! Captain Johansson breathed, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm at his hip. I've never seen so many in one pod. Astrid's scientific mind kicked into overdrive, pushing past her fear. At least 20 individuals, she noted, her voice steady as she dictated into her recorder. Multiple age groups present, including, yes, at least 2 calves. The orcas began to circle the boat, their movements synchronized with eerie precision. It was a display of coordination that Astrid had never seen before in wild orcas. Maria, are you getting this? Astrid called, not taking her eyes off the water. Every second, Maria confirmed, her camera clicking rapidly. Astrid, look at their eye patches. The patterns, they're unlike any we've documented in the local populations. Astrid zoomed in with her own camera, gasping as she saw what Maria meant. The distinctive white patches around the orca's eyes were marked with intricate, almost geometrical patterns. It was as if someone had drawn complex symbols on their skin. This is unprecedented, Astrid murmured. These markings, they're not natural, they can't be. Captain Johansson's voice was tense. Dr. Larson, I don't like this. These animals are behaving erratically. I'm considering aborting the mission. Wait, Astrid pleaded. They're not showing any signs of aggression. This is a unique opportunity to observe. Her words were cut off as the largest orca, a male with a towering dorsal fin, suddenly broke from the circle. With a powerful leap, it breached mere meters from the boat, sending a spray of icy water over the deck. Astrid found herself staring directly into the orca's eye as it hung suspended in the air for a heart-stopping moment. There was an intelligence there that went beyond anything she had ever encountered in her years of research, and something else, a sense of purpose, of intent. As the orca crashed back into the sea, Astrid stumbled backwards, her mind reeling. Did you see that? She gasped, turning to Maria. The way it looked at us. Maria nodded, her face a mix of awe and fear. It was like it was trying to communicate. Captain Johansson had seen enough. That's it, we're leaving. This is too dangerous. But as he moved to give the order, something extraordinary happened. The orcas, moving in perfect unison, began to herd a massive school of herring towards the boat. The sea boiled with fish, creating a silver curtain around the vessel. They're feeding, Astrid said, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. But why bring the fish to us? It's almost like they're showing off, Maria finished, her voice filled with wonder. Demonstrating their hunting techniques. For the next hour, Astrid and her team watched in amazement as the orcas put on a display of coordinated hunting behavior, unlike anything ever documented. They used complex vocalizations to coordinate their movements, herded fish with precision, and even seemed to take turns feeding, ensuring every member of the pod got their share. As the feeding frenzy died down, the large male orca that had breached earlier approached the boat again. This time its movements were slow, almost cautious. It spy-hopped, raising its head out of the water to look directly at Astrid. In that moment, Astrid felt a connection that defied scientific explanation. It was as if the orca was trying to tell her something, to make her understand. "What are you?" she whispered, leaning over the railing. "What are you trying to show us?" As if in response, the orca slowly sank beneath the waves. For a moment all was still. Then, with a flick of its powerful tail, it dove deep, followed by the rest of the pod. The silence that followed was deafening. Astrid stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. It was Maria who finally broke the spell. "Astrid," she said, her voice shaking, "the markings on their eye patches, I think they might be symbols, like a written language." Astrid turned to her colleague, her eyes wide. "That's impossible. Orcas don't have written language. No animal does except humans." "I know," Maria replied, "but look at these images. The patterns are too complex, too consistent to be random. It's as if someone gave them those markings," Astrid finished, the implications sending a chill down her spine. Captain Johansson approached, his face grave. "Dr. Larson, I've just received a report from headquarters. There have been similar orca sightings all along the coast, from Tromsø to Bergen, always the same behavior. Approaching boats, displaying coordinated hunting techniques." Astrid felt as if the world was tilting beneath her feet. This wasn't just a local phenomenon. It was happening on a scale that defied explanation. "We need to alert the international marine biology community," she said, her mind racing. "Set up a coordinated observation effort. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than just our fjord." As the Coast Guard vessel began its journey back to port, Astrid stood at the railing, her eyes fixed on the spot where the orcas had disappeared. She had come seeking answers, but had only found more questions. What had caused this dramatic shift in orca behavior? Were the markings truly a form of language? And if so, who or what had given it to them? One thing was certain. The mystery of the fjord orcas had just become a global phenomenon. And Astrid Larson was at the center of it all, standing on the brink of a discovery that could change our understanding of animal intelligence forever. As the coastline grew closer, Astrid made a silent vow. She would unravel this mystery no matter where it led her. The orcas had shown her something extraordinary, and she was determined to understand what it meant, for science, for humanity, and for the future of interspecies communication. The real journey, she realized, was only just beginning. The conference hall at the International Marine Mammal Symposium in Vancouver buzzed with excitement. Scientists from around the world had gathered to discuss the most perplexing phenomenon in recent marine biology history, the sudden and widespread change in orca behavior along the Norwegian coast. Astrid Larson stood at the podium, her heart racing as she faced the sea of expectant faces. 6 months had passed since her encounter in the fjord, and in that time, the scientific community had been turned upside down by reports of similar incidents across the North Atlantic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Astrid began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "what I'm about to present challenges everything we thought we knew about cetacean intelligence and behavior." The room fell silent as Astrid launched into her presentation. She detailed her near-death experience in the storm, the orca's inexplicable behavior, and the subsequent observations made by her team and others along the Norwegian coast. "But it's not just the behavior that's unprecedented," Astrid continued, clicking to a new slide. "It's this." The screen filled with a high-resolution image of an orca's eye patch, marked with intricate geometrical patterns. A murmur rippled through the audience. These markings have been observed on orcas from Norway to Iceland, even as far south as the Faroe Islands. They are consistent across pods and appear to be artificial in nature. Dr. James Chen, a renowned cetacean biologist from California, stood up. "Dr. Larson, Are you suggesting these markings are man-made, that this is some kind of elaborate hoax? Astrid shook her head. No, Dr. Chen. While we can't rule out human intervention entirely, the scale and consistency of these markings across such a wide geographic area make that highly unlikely. What we're seeing here is something entirely new. She clicked to the next slide, showing a series of spectrograms. These are recordings of Orca vocalizations taken over the past 6 months. As you can see, there's a level of complexity and consistency that goes far beyond anything we've previously documented. Dr. Elena Sokolov, our team's bioacoustics expert, believes we may be looking at the emergence of a new form of Orca communication. The room erupted in discussion. Astrid could see the mix of excitement and skepticism on her colleagues' faces. She understood their reaction. 6 months ago, she would have been just as doubtful. As the questions flew, Astrid did her best to answer them, always returning to the data, to the evidence they had gathered. But even as she spoke, she knew that they had barely scratched the surface of this mystery. After the presentation, Astrid found herself surrounded by a group of excited researchers, all eager to discuss her findings. As she fielded their questions, she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Dr. Larson?" "A word, if you please." Astrid turned to find herself face to face with Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the elderly Japanese scientist whose work on cetacean intelligence had inspired her own career. His presence at the symposium was unexpected. Rumor had it he had retired years ago. "Dr. Tanaka," Astrid said, unable to hide her surprise and admiration. "It's an honor to meet you." The old scientist's eyes twinkled. "The honor is mine, Dr. Larson. Your work. It is most intriguing. Perhaps we could discuss it further." "In private?" Astrid nodded, excusing herself from the group and following Dr. Tanaka to a quiet corner of the conference hall. As they sat down, she noticed the deep lines of concern etched on his face. "Your findings, Dr. Larson," he began, his voice low. "They are remarkable. But I fear you may have stumbled upon something far more complex than you realize." Astrid leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean, Dr. Tanaka?" The old scientist sighed heavily. 30 years ago, I was part of a classified research project. We were studying Orca communication, much like you are now, but our focus was different." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "We were attempting to enhance their cognitive abilities, to create a form of communication between humans and orcas." Astrid felt her blood run cold. "You were experimenting on them genetically?" Dr. Tanaka shook his head. "Not genetically, no. We were using a combination of acoustic stimulation and a specially developed compound that we believed would enhance their neural plasticity. The goal was to unlock latent cognitive potential, to bridge the gap between our species." "What happened?" Astrid asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The initial results were promising. The orcas we worked with showed increased problem-solving abilities, more complex vocalizations, but then..." He trailed off, his eyes distant. "There was an accident. Several of our test subjects escaped. We thought they had died in the open ocean." Astrid's mind raced, connecting the dots. "But they didn't die, did they? They survived. And now, decades later..." Dr. Tanaka nodded gravely. "It appears our work may have had unintended consequences. The changes we induced, they may have been passed down through generations, spreading through the orca population." Astrid sat back, stunned. The implications were staggering. "Dr. Tanaka, we need to go public with this information. The scientific community needs to know." The old scientist held up a hand, stopping her. "It's not that simple, Dr. Larson. The project was highly classified. There are powerful people who would prefer this information remain buried." "But the orcas," Astrid protested. "The changes in their behavior, the markings, people are noticing. We can't keep this secret." Dr. Tanaka's expression was pained. "I understand your position, Dr. Larson, but I urge you to be cautious. There are forces at work here beyond the realm of pure science, forces that may not have the orca's best interests at heart." As if on cue, Astrid's phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "Astrid, you need to see this. Turn on the news. Now." Excusing herself, Astrid hurried to the conference hall's media room. A small crowd had already gathered around the television. On the screen, a news anchor was speaking urgently. Reports coming in from multiple countries bordering the North Atlantic. Large pods of orcas have been sighted approaching major ports and harbors. Shipping has been disrupted, and there are concerns about public safety. Authorities are advising all boats to remain in port until further notice. The room filled with excited chatter. Astrid stood frozen, her mind reeling from the implications. The orcas weren't just changing. They were organizing on a scale never before seen in cetacean behavior. As she watched the footage of massive orca pods moving with eerie synchronization, Astrid felt a mix of awe and trepidation. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the orcas were trying to communicate something to humanity. But what? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Captain Johansen from the Norwegian Coast Guard. His message was brief but urgent. "Dr. Larsen, we need you back in Tromsø immediately. The situation is escalating." Astrid looked up from her phone to find Dr. Tanaka watching. His expression grave. "It's beginning, isn't it?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think it is. And I have to go back. I have to try to understand what they want." Dr. Tanaka placed a hand on her arm. "Be careful, Dr. Larsen. You're walking into uncharted waters in more ways than one. Remember, sometimes the pursuit of knowledge can have unforeseen consequences." As Astrid rushed to make arrangements for her immediate return to Norway, her mind was a whirlwind of questions and theories. The mystery of the orcas had suddenly become a global phenomenon, one that could reshape humanity's relationship with the ocean and its inhabitants. Whatever was coming, Astrid knew she had to be there to witness it, to try to bridge the gap between two worlds. As she boarded her flight back to Tromsø, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was heading towards something that would change the course of history, for humans and orcas alike. The real challenge, she realized, was not just understanding what the orcas were trying to communicate, but ensuring that humanity was ready to listen. As the plane took off, carrying her back to the turbulent waters of the Norwegian fjords, Astrid Larsen steeled herself for what lay ahead. The next chapter in this extraordinary saga was about to unfold, and she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The Tromsø harbour was a hive of frantic activity as Astrid's taxi pulled up to the Coast Guard headquarters. Military vessels dotted the waters, their crews on high alert. The sky was heavy with the whir of helicopter blades, their searchlights sweeping the fjord in wide arcs. Astrid hurried inside, her mind still reeling from the long flight and the weight of Dr. Tanaka's revelations. She found Captain Johansen in the command center, surrounded by a team of officers poring over maps and sonar readings. "Dr. Larsen," the captain greeted her, his face etched with worry. "Thank you for coming so quickly. The situation has escalated." "I saw the news," Astrid replied, setting down her bag. "What's the latest?" Captain Johansen led her to a large digital map. "In the past 24 hours, we've had reports of orca pods converging on major ports all along the coast. Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim, they're all affected. But the largest concentration is right here in Tromsø." Astrid leaned in, studying the map. Red dots indicating orca sightings clustered around the mouth of the fjord, forming an almost perfect blockade. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At last count, over 100 individuals. It's unprecedented, Dr. Larsen. They're not just passing through, they're staying in formation, actively preventing ships from entering or leaving the harbor." Astrid's mind raced. 100 orcas working in concert? It defied everything she thought she knew about their behavior. "Have there been any aggressive actions? Any attacks on vessels?" The captain shook his head. "No, nothing like that. They're watching, waiting. It's as if they're trying to tell us something, but we don't know what." A young officer approached, tablet in hand. "Captain, we're receiving reports of similar orca concentrations forming near coastal nuclear power plants in France and the UK." Astrid and Captain Johansen exchanged alarmed glances. This was no longer just a scientific anomaly. It was rapidly becoming a matter of national, perhaps global, security. "We need to establish communication," Astrid said firmly. "If they're trying to send a message, we need to find a way to receive it." Captain Johansen nodded grimly. "I agree, but how? Our usual methods of cetacean research aren't designed for whatever this is." Astrid took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to propose. "We go out there, Not in a large vessel, but something small. A Zodiac, perhaps. Just me and a small team. We get close, deploy our most sensitive hydrophones, and we listen. The captain's eyes widened. Dr. Larson, I can't in good conscience send you out there. It's too dangerous. These animals, they're not behaving normally. We don't know what they might do. With all due respect, Captain, Astrid countered, we don't have a choice. Every minute we wait, the situation escalates. Ports are shut down, power plants are threatened. We need answers, and we need them now. For a long moment, Captain Johansson was silent, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded. All right. But you'll have a military escort, and at the first sign of danger you pull out, understood? Astrid agreed, relief and apprehension warring within her. As she gathered her team and equipment, her phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Be careful out there. Remember, we're not just observers anymore, we're participants in whatever this is. The words sent a chill down Astrid's spine. Maria was right. They had crossed a threshold. Whatever happened next would shape the future of human-cetacean relations for generations to come. An hour later, Astrid found herself in a small Zodiac skimming across the dark waters of the fjord. The military escort flanked them on either side, their presence both reassuring and somehow intrusive. As they approached the Orca blockade, Astrid felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. The first dorsal fin broke, the surface about 100 meters ahead, then another and another. Soon they were surrounded by a forest of fins, the water churning with the movement of massive bodies beneath the surface. My God, breathed Dr. Elena Sokolov, the bioacoustics expert who had insisted on joining the expedition. I've never seen so many in one place. Astrid nodded, her eyes scanning the water. The orcas moved with eerie synchronization, their patterns too precise to be natural, and there, on their eye patches, she could see the strange geometric markings that had baffled researchers for months. Deploy the hydrophones, Astrid ordered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As the sensitive equipment was lowered into the water, she switched on the recording devices. Now we listen. For several long minutes there was nothing but the ambient noise of the fjord and the low hum of the Zodiac's idling motor. Then suddenly the headphones erupted with sound. Clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls filled the air. But there was something different about these vocalizations. They were more complex, more rhythmic, almost like it's language, Eleanor gasped, her eyes wide with amazement. Astrid, I think they're actually speaking to us. Before Astrid could respond, the largest orca she had ever seen surfaced just meters from their boat. Its eye, intelligent and somehow ancient, fixed directly on her. In that moment, Astrid felt a connection that transcended species, a depth of understanding that both thrilled and terrified her. The orca opened its mouth, and what emerged was unlike anything Astrid had ever heard. It was a series of clicks, and whistles, yes, but modulated in a way that was undeniably linguistic. The sound reverberated through her body, seeming to bypass her ears and speak directly to her mind. Images flashed before Astrid's eyes. Melting ice caps, polluted oceans, dying coral reefs. She saw schools of fish dwindling, whales entangled in nets, and islands of plastic choking the sea. But she also saw hope. Humans and cetaceans working together, a symbiotic relationship that could heal the oceans, and by extension, the planet. As sea. The vision faded. Astrid found herself gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. She looked around to see her colleagues in similar states of shock and awe. Did you all see that? She asked, her voice shaking. Elena nodded, her face pale. It was like they uploaded information directly into our brains. Astrid, this goes beyond anything we've ever encountered. It's not just communication, it's a sharing of consciousness. The implications were staggering. If the orcas could transmit complex ideas and imagery directly into human minds, it changed everything. It wasn't just a new form of language, it was a whole new paradigm of interspecies communication. As Astrid struggled to process what had just happened, her radio crackled. To life. It was Captain Johansson, his voice tense. Dr. Larson, we're picking up unusual seismic activity in the fjord. I'm ordering you back to shore immediately. Astrid opened her mouth to protest, but the words died in her throat as she felt a tremor run through the water. The orcas around them began to dive, their movements still eerily coordinated. "Something's coming," Elena whispered, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. As if in response to her words, the water at the center of the orca pod began to churn. A massive shape rose from the depths, dwarfing even the largest orcas. Astrid's scientific mind struggled to categorize what she was seeing. It was cetacean in form, but unlike any whale she had ever encountered. Its skin was marked with the same geometric patterns they had observed on the orcas, but on a scale that defied belief. The creature, for Astrid couldn't think of a better word, breached the surface, water cascading off its enormous body. As it turned its ancient eye towards the small zodiac, Astrid felt a presence in her mind, vast and alien yet somehow familiar. Words formed in her consciousness, not heard but felt. "We have waited long. Now it is time. You must listen. You must learn. The future of both our kinds depends on it." Astrid Larsen, marine biologist and lifelong student of the sea, found herself at the precipice of the greatest discovery in human history. As the massive being sank back beneath the waves, leaving behind a turbulent sea and a group of stunned scientists, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The orcas had not just been trying to communicate, they had been heralds, preparing the way for something far greater, something that would challenge humanity's place in the world and potentially offer a path to salvation for the oceans and the planet. As the Zodiac turned back towards shore, Astrid's mind reeled with the implications. How would the world react to this revelation? What changes would it bring to science, to politics, to the very fabric of human society? One thing was certain: the mystery of the fjord orcas had been just the beginning. A new chapter in Earth's history was about to unfold, and Astrid Larsen found herself at its very center, holding the key to a future she could scarcely imagine. The world held its breath as Astrid Larsen stepped up to the podium at the United Nations General Assembly. The chamber was packed, with delegates from every nation and news cameras broadcasting to billions around the globe. In the month since the encounter in the Tromsø fjord, the world had been gripped by a mixture of fear, wonder, and anticipation. Astrid took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She was no longer just a marine biologist. She had become the primary intermediary between humanity and whatever intelligence lurked in the depths of the ocean. "Distinguished delegates, members of the press, citizens of the world," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What I am about to share with you will change our understanding of life on Earth and our place in it forever." Over. The next hour, Astrid detailed the events that had unfolded in Norway. She explained the unprecedented orca behavior, the strange markings, and finally, the emergence of the massive, unknown cetacean being. As she spoke, holographic images flickered behind her, showing footage from that fateful day in the fjord. This entity, which we have tentatively named Oceanus, appears to be a highly advanced form of cetacean life, Astrid continued. It possesses the ability to communicate complex ideas directly into our minds through some form of telepathy. And its message is clear. Our oceans are in crisis, and with them, the entire planet. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Astrid could see the mixture of awe and skepticism on the faces before her. The delegate from China stood up. "Dr. Larsen, while your account is extraordinary, how can we be certain that this Oceanus truly exists? That this is not some elaborate hoax or misunderstanding?" Astrid nodded, having anticipated this question. "I understand your skepticism, Ambassador. That's why we've prepared this." She gestured to her colleague, Dr. Elena Sokolov, who activated a device on the podium. Suddenly, the air was filled with a series of clicks, whistles, and low, resonant tones. It was a recording of Oceanus's vocalizations. As the sounds played, Astrid watched the faces of the delegates. She saw confusion turn to shock, and then to something like awe. Several people gasped, their eyes widening as if seeing something no one else could see. When the recording ended, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the delegate from India slowly rose to her feet, her face pale. I saw images, visions of the ocean, of creatures I've never seen before. How is this possible?" Astrid smiled softly. What you experienced is what we call cetacean telepathy. So Oceanus and the Orcas have the ability to transmit thoughts and images directly into our minds. It's a form of communication far beyond anything we've ever encountered. The US delegate spoke up next, his voice tense. Dr. Larson, you mentioned a crisis in our oceans. Can you elaborate on what exactly this Oceanus was asking of us? Astrid's expression grew serious. Oceanus showed us visions of the damage we've done to the oceans. Overfishing, pollution, acidification due to climate change. But it also showed us a potential future where humans and cetaceans work together to restore the health of our planet's waters. She paused, letting her words sink in. What Oceanus is proposing is nothing short of a complete reimagining of our relationship with the ocean. It's offering to share knowledge, advanced biotechnology, sustainable energy solutions, even ways to mitigate climate change. But in return, it's asking for a global commitment to ocean conservation on an unprecedented scale. The chamber erupted in discussion. Astrid could hear snippets of conversation, concerns about economic impact, questions about the validity of the cetaceans' claims, excitement about potential technological advancements. The Secretary General called for order, then turned to Astrid. Dr. Larson, what you're proposing would require a level of international cooperation we've never achieved before. How can we possibly coordinate such an effort? Astrid leaned forward, her voice passionate. That's exactly what Oceanus is offering to help with. It and the Orcas can act as a kind of biological internet, facilitating communication and cooperation on a global scale. They can help us monitor ocean health, coordinate conservation efforts, even predict and mitigate natural disasters. As the implications of her words sank in, Astrid could see the mix of emotions playing across the faces of the delegates. Fear, excitement, skepticism, hope. It was all there. The delegate from Brazil stood up. Dr. Larson, while this all sounds promising, we can't ignore the potential dangers. What if this Oceanus has hostile intentions? We'd be giving an unknown entity unprecedented influence over our planet. Astrid nodded, acknowledging the concern. You're right to be cautious. We're stepping into unknown territory. But consider this. Oceanus and the Orcas have demonstrated the power to shut down our ports, to approach our nuclear facilities. If their intentions were hostile, they could have caused immense damage already. Instead, they're reaching out, offering to share knowledge and work together. She paused, looking around the chamber. We stand at a crossroads. We can choose fear, close ourselves off, and continue down a path that's leading us towards environmental catastrophe. Or we can choose hope, embrace this opportunity, and work towards a future where humans and cetaceans are partners in stewarding our planet. The chamber fell silent as her words hung in the air. Astrid could almost see the weight of the decision pressing down on each delegate. Finally, the Secretary General spoke. Dr. Larson, what you've presented us with today is unprecedented. It will take time for us to fully grasp the implications and come to a decision, but I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we cannot ignore this. We must engage. Astrid felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a full commitment, but it was a start. As the session adjourned and delegates began to file out, engaged in intense discussions, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Maria, who had been watching from the sidelines. You did it, Astrid, her friend said, eyes shining. You've opened the door, now the real work begins. Astrid nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion. It's just the first step, Maria. We have a long way to go. As they left the UN building, they were met by a wall of reporters, all clamoring for comments. Astrid raised her hands, calling for quiet. I know you all have questions, she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, and I promise we'll answer as many as we can in the coming days. But right now I have a message for everyone watching around the world. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. What we're facing isn't just a scientific discovery or a diplomatic challenge. It's an opportunity to redefine our place in the world, to become true stewards of this planet we call home. The oceans have always been a frontier, a place of mystery and discovery. Now they're offering us a chance at redemption, at a new beginning. Astrid's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. To Oceanus and the Orcas, if you're somehow listening, We hear you. We're ready to learn, to change, to work together. And to everyone else, stay curious, stay open-minded, and above all, stay hopeful. The future of our oceans, of our world, depends on it. As the cameras flashed and the reporters called out questions, Astrid felt a sense of both trepidation and excitement. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but for the first time in years, she felt genuinely hopeful about the future of the planet. The mystery of the fjord orcas had led to something far greater than she could have ever imagined. It had opened the door to a new era of interspecies cooperation, one that held the promise of healing the wounds humanity had inflicted on the Earth. As Astrid looked out over the bustling city, her mind drifted to the vast, mysterious oceans that covered so much of the planet. Somewhere out there, Oceanus and the orcas were waiting, ready to embark on this unprecedented journey alongside humanity. The next chapter in Earth's history was about to be written, and Astrid Larsen found herself at the center of it all, a bridge between two worlds, poised on the brink of a future limited only by the depths of their collective imagination and the vastness of the seas that had brought them together.